Good afternoon, Chairman Prail, members of the committee. My name is Abraham Fahnensteel, and I'm here today on behalf of the Kansas County Treasurers Association, and we respectfully ask for introduction of 22 RS 2465 concerning adjustments and transparency in motor vehicle fees.
Does anyone have any questions? Seeing none, are there any objections? There are no objections. It's introduced. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Are there further bill introductions? Seeing none, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Secretary of Transportation, Julie Lorenz. We're pleased to have you with us this afternoon, and we'll just turn the floor over to you and be ready for questions because we will ask some.
Please, I look forward to your questions. We were in Senate Transportation this morning, and they had a few. Senator Hawk had a lot, but in a really good way. So I look forward to sharing with you our 101 update. And there we go. All right. So let's start first with this slide. And our namesake, we're named after Eisenhower, so we are the Eisenhower Legacy Transportation Program, fondly called IKE. And you know, we used to think of transportation as just roads and bridges, but really, we are a means to an end. Every investment we make ought to be making our system either safer, we ought to be driving down the cost of transporting people or goods and services, we are moving data in a new kind of technology age. All of that needs to come together. We need to leverage all of our investments to make sure we're making quality of life for Kansans better. And to that end, we want Kansas to be a great place to both work and play and live. And a good transportation systems helps support all of that. So, a quick reminder that progress has many partners. And when I look around this room, I want to say how much I appreciate whether it was the Legislative Task Force or in 2019 when we passed the EV registration and expanded tolling legislation, or in 2020 and Representative Prail carried on the floor the IKE program, which you all passed with 4 hours to spare before we all went home for an abbreviated COVID session. We have gone on to identify 2 rounds of projects to go into the development pipeline, 1 round of projects that have been identified for construction. So we now have our rolling program fully implemented. And year after year after year, we're engaging with citizens and identifying new projects that will help support our state. So a sincere thank you to communities that work with us, to KDOT employees, to the governor and her budget, to the work you all do to support budgets and refine those, up and down the line with our private sector partners. This is a team sport, and I appreciate everything that everybody does. So with that, we're going to get into a quick overview, but because you guys are pretty well-versed in KDOT, I want to spend more time on the update part. So first, this slide helps us understand why I talk about systems are so important. Our local system and our state system. Most ag loads, for example, start in a field that get loaded onto a truck, that most of those have to go across a county bridge, that then either get to a state highway or to rail lines or another way to get our products either to other states or across the globe. Here are a couple of things to note. So for example, that top bar represents traffic. 54% of all the traffic in Kansas is carried on the state system, which is only 7% of the miles. When you look at the county's system, you see about 14% of traffic is on the county system, but that represents 81% of all the miles. So you have to think about where people are moving, who owns that system, and how those systems work together. When I talk about some of the new federal dollars, you'll understand why I think it is so important, not that we just work with our city and county partners, but that we're sharing funds and leveraging their dollars too. Now, in terms of bridges, this is a pretty important graphic because what it shows is that we have about 20,000 local bridges and about 5,000 state bridges. Our local bridges are not in as good shape as our state bridges. We've got 6% of local bridges in bad shape and about 47% in fair shape. On the state side, about 1% are bad and 22% are fair. So we need to take that into consideration as we think about how we allocate dollars. In terms of modes, you can see the dollars there. These are not systems. We don't operate airports, but we do have CAPE, the Kansas Airport Improvement Program, that we administer, which gets dollars out to help them both improve like navigation systems, runways, that sort of thing. So you can see both the size of the systems and the dollars. We certainly aren't running railroads. We got Pat Hubble back there who is. So this is where we pay attention to how we work with both our public and private sector partners. Now, going back to that idea of systems and systems, under Ike, I'm really pleased with the way we put new programs into place to help improve our system of systems. Cost Share has been a really phenomenally popular and important program. We've invested, as a state, about $96 million in Cost Share. Locals have brought $68 million. This is a great program for getting projects across the finish line. While we require a 15% match, many cases we see a much higher match than that, but we certainly take into account in the application process whether communities have the means to bring more to the table or not. Local Bridge Program, again, on the task force, you all heard how important that program is, and we have stood it up and we continue to fund it at about $5 million per year. This graphic shows you all of the programs, our portfolio that is available through Ike. The blue buttons represent programs that were available under T-Works and have continued under Ike. Preservation, modernization, expansion, you're familiar with those programs, and some of the new programs ranging from broadband to cost share to innovative tech. I'm pleased to say all of those programs were stood up in 2020 despite COVID. That is a testament both to KDOT employees as well as our private sector partners. This slide you all are familiar with. This is how we fund transportation in Kansas. It is a good mix of federal and state funds, bond proceeds, sales tax. Some of those dollars go to the Special City County Highway Fund by statute. So those are dollars that go to cities and counties. We have the State Highway Fund. A few of the ordinary transfers, those include funds that go like to the Highway Patrol and revenue to collect gas tax. This is a graphic that shows our revenue, all funds from 22. You can see sales tax is about a third, motor fuels tax about 24%, federal funds come in at about 27%. These are our expenditures. I'm glad to say we've got construction up at 53%. Maintenance is at 9%. Maintenance is like snow plowing, pothole patching, putting signs up, that sort of thing. Snow and ice. I remember the first year I was here, it was just like one storm on top of the next, on top of the next. We ended up spending $27 million. Our average is $19 million. This has been a fantastic year. Prior to the storm yesterday, we were sitting at about $600,000 in terms of expenditures. I don't know walking in today, it's probably not quite $1 million, but we did spend some extra dollars with the storm from yesterday and into today. So I've talked about the scale of our infrastructure, and I've talked about how we pay for that infrastructure. Now I want to talk a little bit about our principles that we're using to deliver our infrastructure, very much focused on partnerships, more options, so that we can be solving problems for Kansans. First, the keystone of our partnership is through local consult, where we go out and talk with communities every 2 years. I think what's notable is as we put the Ike program together, we heard from about 2,000 Kansans. This fall, we heard from 2,569 Kansans. To me, that says transportation continues to be very important to our residents across the state. I've talked a little bit already about the rolling program. We put $1.6 billion in about 8 weeks after the bill was signed. We put $750 million in at the end of 21, and we've identified $750 million for construction. You'll recall that we identify projects for construction based on how much money we have available. I think it's a really important management tool that we now have, and we are very transparent about dollars coming in and dollars going out. Now, in terms of progress overall, first I want to note all of the T-Works projects as required. The first phase of all T-Works projects have been let to construction. We're making good progress on those. So that was required. Check that box. I'm also pleased to say that we have seen a decrease of 41% in worker comp incidents, saving over $1.5 million for Kansas taxpayers. And that's not because we aren't doing much work. We've actually increased construction lettings by 200%. It's because we're really focused on making sure workers are safe and can go home at night, and we're getting a lot of work done in the meantime. We are spending most of our money on preservation. I'll be happy to come back to this in a minute because I've got some fairly significant news to share with you all as it relates to preservation. It is our top priority. You can see here what our construction lettings look like. Those are the contracts that we sign with contractors to do building. And you can see it's increased from 420 in 2019. We're now at $980 million. It's a ton of work. If you feel like you see orange cones everywhere, it's because you do. Now, those are the contracts. You can think about it often takes 1 or 2, sometimes 3 years to build a full project. So this is why you see payments lag the lettings, because we're making monthly payments. So we went from about $250 million. We're now in 22 at $450 million, and those dollars will continue to increase because those are the payouts on the projects. So I'd like to talk about two sides of the same coin. We've got lots of good opportunities, and we have some significant challenges that I want to share with you as we look forward. This is my new favorite slide. So we think about opportunities, and don't get fooled, because opportunities take effort, right? Our favorite electrician there, Thomas Edison, he says, we kind of miss those opportunities because they come dressed in overalls and they look like work, because they are. But here's the thing. We're doing work for today's citizens, absolutely, but I would say just as importantly, for future generations. The investments that we're making today as a state should last 10, 20, 50 years. So we need to be really mindful about what we invest in. People count on us today and tomorrow to make good decisions. We are at work and we want to stay at work. Here are our challenges, these are the 3 that I see as our top challenges: workforce, safety, and inflation. I want to stop for a moment and say thank you to Representative Francis and his subcommittee. We were in earlier this week to talk about some of our workforce challenges. And I appreciate not only that he called us in, but that he's been allowing employees to speak. And I think that's really healthy and important. And I appreciate your entire committee's time and effort on that. Thank you. As you learned, so this will be a bit of a, like there's a little rehash here, but I think it's important. We have seen a 6% decline in our workforce in the last 5 years. Yet I told you we had a 200% increase in construction. We're doing that in a couple of different ways. There's no perfect answer here, but I want to explain to you how we are accomplishing some of that additional work. I want to point out that we have 60% fewer inspectors than we did in 2011, and we estimate this year that we need more than 200 inspectors to be able to do our work. There are a couple of ways to address that, but I'll describe the challenges a bit more. So it's mostly on the preservation program, and we have been having conversations with our consultants and our contractors to figure out what we can do, what business practices we can modify in addition to trying to hire more people. And the first one I found to be like, okay, that one shouldn't be too hard. So previously, we required we would require the consultant to identify by name every inspector that was going to be on a job. Well, that is kind of hard in this kind of environment. So you may or may not know whether Bob's going to be available in 3 months or not. So we've changed that to say, you will provide a qualified inspector. We don't have to know specifically who it is on what day. That makes things a little easier for our private sector. Then on this 1R schedule, we used to announce the work we were going to do in the coming year between October and January. And a lot of that work then would start like in March and April. In working with our contractors, they're like, if you could give us more heads up, we can assemble our teams and be more efficient as we put them to work. So now we are targeting to be able to identify work earlier in the year. First time we've done it, I want to give shout out to Bert, who's back here, our chief engineer. His team's working really hard to implement and accelerate the work that we do internally. This is another example of bundling inspection services. So this isn't like the actual projects, but this is to say, in Northwest Kansas, we're going to have 18 projects that need to be inspected. We want the private sector to know in advance what those are, and they can better plan. If they're planning for 18 projects, it decreases mobilization costs than to say, we're going to do one-off projects each one at a time, if we can put those together geographically. That has been helpful to them as well. I would be remiss if I didn't point out, though, paying people more money would be helpful. For state inspectors, when you adjust for inflation, our inspectors in real dollars make less than they did in 1990. We're also looking at bringing consultants in-house. Southwest District 6 is actively exploring doing that, so they would like literally sit in our offices to do the work. There are pros and cons to that, and I'd be happy to speak to that during questions if you'd like. This is a small silver lining as it relates to COVID. So e-ticketing, this is an electronic means, so we continued with construction all through COVID. When a truck pulls up with materials, literally the driver would hand a ticket to an inspector. It was already certified back at the plant, but we were just doing all of this by paper. We moved to electronic ticketing during COVID so that you didn't have all that face-to-face interaction. Now we're just implementing it as a practice. Lots of states have been doing that. We're now implementing what I think is more of a standard practice. We are also exploring with FHWA, our federal partners, doing more of a risk-based approach to inspection, such that for really big, complicated, or expensive projects, we do a thorough inspection. For those that are like little patches, we may not spend as much inspection time, if at all. So we're trying to make sure we're applying resources where they're really most needed. Okay, so that's workforce. Shifting gears a bit to safety. We are not having the success that we need in terms of safety, and you can see our fatality numbers there. We're not bending the curve the way we need to. There are a host of reasons for that. Everything from roads that need more shoulders to people who need to buckle up. I mean, it runs the gamut. One of the programs we're implementing is the Clear Zone program, and this was Bert and his crew are really pushing hard on this. This is a fantastic new program. The goal is to really focus on those D&E routes. So those are the routes that won't have enough traffic that they'd ever rise up in our formula. And I smile because my note to myself is, look at Representative Prahl here. And look at Representative Francis here. Because this is the kinds of stuff we talked about through the task force and through the long-range plan. This sort of fills the gap between preservation plus and modernization. This is like that modernization minus category. This is us not worrying about our categories so much and really focusing on where the work needs to be done. So these are lightly traveled routes that don't have shoulders. We might have to buy a little right-of-way, not a lot of right-of-way, to make a difference. So we want to use some of our new federal funds to get at some of these safety problems. So we call it Clear Zone, and as it says there, it wouldn't warrant a full modernization project, but we can probably get a little shoulder on it. K99 comes to mind in the Southeast. So this is something we're excited to try. We also have what I would term a more aggressive safety campaign, education campaign, trying again to bend that curve on fatalities. All right, our third challenge is on inflation and prices. We are keeping a close eye on inflation because we don't want all of our new dollars to go to inflation. On the other hand, and I'll share with you in a minute about preservation, why we need to continue to do our work. As background, we built 4.5% inflation into the IKE program. That was built on the 4.5% that we had in T-Works, which was built on the 4.5% we used under the CTP. Because we are not looking at 1 year at a time. This is a 10-year program. 4.5% works pretty well over 10 years because we got some years it's higher, some years it's lower, and we just have to keep an eye to make sure over a 10-year period it all evens out. We are concerned. December lettings came in at 19% over estimate. Nobody likes to hear that, but it doesn't mean we stop work. It means we keep an eye on it and have a sense of, Are we going to need to pull some of that back, or do we continue full steam ahead? Here are some examples of what we've seen in the years. So on light preservation, you can see it went up by about $50,000 per mile from December 20 to November 21. This is just one example project. On heavy preservation, went from $250,000 a mile in March of 21 to $345,000 per mile in December of 21. So we're watching it carefully, but it is not time yet to back off. Okay. And this is the reason why, is that there are, if it was just one factor, if it was just inflation, that'd be one thing. But of course, it's going to be more complicated than that because there are other things to balance. So a way to think about preservation, because remember, our highway system is worth north of $30 billion. We're going to spend $5 billion in 10 years to take care of it. So it's worth thinking about for a minute. The thin overlays essentially cost 1x. They're the cheap things. They go on the top. Well, that's not right. They're the least expensive. They go on the top. They last roughly 4 years. The rehabilitation, heavier work, 2x, maybe 7 years. Now on the reconstruction side, asphalt, 3x. If it was brand new, it'd be coming in at 13 years. We know concrete lasts longer. Of course, concrete's more expensive. It's 4x. So what we're trying to do is balance the mix of those actions over time. Well, here's one way, and this is the way we have thought about pavement health for a long time, and those from the task force will remember how we talked about this. And I rounded numbers because it would drive us, like I could get you really precise numbers. I'm doing you a favor. We're going to round. 10,000 miles of highway, okay? Every year, you lose 1 year of life on that whole system. So to stay even, you want to add 10,000 miles of year life. You want to put that 10,000 back on. You want to put 1 year back on top of the year you lost. All right. Well, in 21, good news. Given the mix of actions and the dollars we invested, you can see there that we did 604, about 600 miles of our various actions. Multiply that out, and we hit 10,540 miles roughly of adding life back in. So we would say that's keeping us steady, and that's true. However, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you go back a few years, you go back to 2017, given the mix of actions that occurred then, we only put in 6,000 miles of life. Okay? So this chart will be familiar to some. That gold line represents like steady state. Taking out 10,000, putting in 10,000. And we know that we had some years where we put in more money. We also know we had years where we didn't put in enough. And thus you see we are in a bit of a deficit position. You also see at the very bottom right of the chart, that blue line is we're starting to bend that curve up a little bit because we're adding in life as we should. However, this is not a perfect way to look at it. It's not a sophisticated way. It's not a way to manage a system. So previously on this year life business, think of it as a report card. And what I essentially explained to you is we were getting worse, we were getting better. What I didn't tell you is, were we at a C and we brought up to a B? Or were we at an F and we came up to a D? Saw, Senator Dietrich this morning. She was really interested in this part of the conversation. What we can do is show you relatively, are we getting better or worse? But you have no idea if better or worse is compared to something that's good or bad, because it's all about the surface. I'll come back to that in just a minute. So that's the one measure where we were just saying, are we adding life or not? The other measure on the right is what the feds require us to report. And it is simply a measure of what the surface is like. And I'm not blaming, it's not a great measure. And here's why. They had to get 50 states to agree to it. It doesn't represent anything other than surface condition. So you can say, oh, cool, our surface is pretty good. But that doesn't tell you the whole story. And this is the thing that you may remember from our meeting on Olathe. You can look at that picture on the left. That is, in our world, a gorgeous highway. It's nice and flat. It's got bright stripes. It rides really smoothly. You look at that and you're like, bingo, that's the highway we want. But when you do the core sample, which is on the right, from that very road, it's crumbling underneath. And we have never talked about what's going on underneath because we couldn't measure it. You can't report what you can't measure. And I am pleased today to be able to roll out our measure. We got more work to do. The analysis isn't done, but we can finally measure it and start talking about it in a productive way. And I'm going to tell you, we got some good news and we got some bad news, as life is. All right, so we can measure it. We now have a complete picture of our system health. What we do is we drive over every mile. It looks at the cracks and the ruts. It extrapolates to identify what's going on in the subsurface. We have done this for years now to then go back and core in random places to correlate the coring with the surface analysis. And we are confident now that those things work together well. So now we can drive the miles and come back and tell you what's going on underneath. It is a huge step forward. I mean, if you're a transportation nerd, today's a big day. This is a huge step forward. However, what we now see, because we're looking at the underneath part, not the top, not just the top. The top is still included, but it's the top and the underneath part. We have 15% in poor condition, right? And you compare that to what you saw under the Fed number, and that is quite a bit worse, but it's because we're looking at the underneath part, the part that hasn't been seen. I'm also here to tell you, this isn't magic. This isn't a new idea. This has been going on around the country for a long time. Texas, Colorado, Nevada, North Carolina, Utah, on and on, have been doing these kinds of measurements for years and years. It's solid methodology. We're just catching up and talking about it. All right, so here's what we know. If you project the $365 million in preservation for the life of the program, you see at 15% in poor condition, we start to bend that down if we keep a steady investment, and our poor condition will start to get better. But because life can't be simple or easy, here's the real chart you ought to be paying more attention to. It's this one right here. So what you see is the top line, poor condition. We go from 15% down to 14% by 2025. Fair condition gets better. It goes from 53% up to 62%. Poor condition, or good condition at the bottom, it gets worse. It goes from 32% good to 24% good. So I was like, well, so what does all that mean, right? Like, some's good, some's bad. What am I supposed to do with that? So here's what we're doing next. So first of all, you have to make sure you're measuring and it all makes sense and it's all correlated. That's good. Now we need to establish targets and start running what-if scenarios. Here's the most important part to take away from this. KDOT has done a good job historically. You say you got $10, KDOT figures out the best use for the $10. That's a way to run an organization. But if you're running a business, you say, okay, well, good to know. But if I want to achieve this or that, how much is it going to cost me? We are working now to develop that tool so that you can say, hey, KDOT, we're going to give you $20. What do we get for our $20? What do we get for our $60? You should be able to ask us, what could we reasonably expect for various investment levels? That's what you deserve. More importantly, it's what Kansas taxpayers deserve. Now, the next question could and should be, what's our target? Well, we're going to spend some time figuring that out. We're not there yet. I just wanted to roll the measure out. We also need to think about our routes. Interstates, and we've got a report card A through E of routes. We look at both traffic, but also freight that goes on those roads, because not every road's created equally. It's not just about numbers of people, though that's important, but also what's being carried on those routes. So we will come back to you over time with an assessment of what's going on the various routes, what we think the targets should be, what it would cost to achieve those targets, and then we can have a good conversation about how you think those ought to be balanced. It will be the first time that we've been able to have that kind of trade-off conversation. I wish we could have done it as part of the task force. We weren't able to, but it's a big day because we're headed in the right direction now. Okay, so that's my favorite part, but now I'm going to talk a little bit about IKE, our program, which will hold us steady, and then Bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law. So now our new buddies are IKE and Bill. They can help us improve. Because we have the IKE program, we have good opportunities to take advantage of the new federal dollars. We've restocked our pipeline. We're ready to roll. You remember we talked about opportunities being dressed up like overalls, so here we go. We know that about $9.9 billion has been allocated for IKE over the 10-year period, $5 billion in preservation. We'll be able to tell you in the coming year or so what that ought to buy you in terms of condition, $2.3 billion, modernization and expansion, and you're familiar with the rest. On top of that, here are the new federal dollars. Now, these are helpful. It's good to have certainty for 5 years. They are not off the charts, huge, big new dollars. Helpful, but don't fall for, it's not huge. It's helpful and big, but not huge. So highways, $89 million more dollars. Bridges, $45 million. That is all new money. We are going to work closely with cities and counties to figure out how we put a program together that will really improve those county bridges, township bridges, whatever, so that the systems work together. Electric vehicle, the charging infrastructure, will get $8 million per year. We recently identified for the VW settlement money, $2.3 million. We identified 7 locations. We'd hoped to do 12. We couldn't afford that. We could get to 7. But now we're going to have $8 million a year. We'll pull together a work group to figure out where those go. We know Southwest Kansas needs charging infrastructure. We know Southeast needs it, has maybe a little bit more, but all across the state, we want to make sure we're closing in the gaps. So we will be working toward that. Rural transit, $3.7 million. I've got concerns about that. It's not that there aren't big needs on rural transit. There absolutely are. We are having a hard time finding bus drivers and every other sort of thing. So stay tuned on that one. Good news about all these dollars, they're not stimulus. They are not like use it or lose it in the next month or year. We need to spend them in the 5-year period for sure, but we can pause for a moment and make some good, thoughtful, intentional investments. Now, the part that I'm jazzed about is that plus sign on the right, where it says discretionary grants. That's what we want to go after. We want to go get additional federal dollars. These dollars are allocated. Somebody's going to get them. It can be Kansas, it can be Missouri, it can be wherever. We want to put together good grant applications to get additional dollars, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Okay, we're going to be working, as I said, cities and counties and rural electric co-op, on and on, as we put together our priorities and our action plans to implement the additional federal dollars. I've already hired a grant writer at KDOT so that we can go get additional funds. Her name is Vanessa. She's available for cities and counties to use as well. However, she's not available to write a grant for just Garden City or just Leavenworth or just Leawood. We're not doing that. This is about regional efforts. So maybe all of Northwest Kansas wants to go after a bunch of bridge money. That's fine. It's easier for USDOT to select and allocate packages of projects, just like it's easier for us to administer. So we'll be looking to work with communities to identify common needs and ways to put those packages together that will, quite frankly, be much more competitive. Also, as I mentioned, we'll be coming back to you with more information about our pavement management system. So we've got a lot looking forward to the future. We've got a lot to balance and keep in mind. Great opportunities, some additional funds, a really robust state program that's well funded, that's got good momentum. We've got our challenges that we've talked about. So we got foot on the gas, but foot near the brake for just in case, but we're going to try to keep all of those things in balance. A couple of things as we look to the future. Happy to come back. I know I'm running close on time. Come back and talk about Charge Up Kansas, which is our electric charging program. The RUC program, I think there was a hearing on that yesterday. It's the road usage charge, where we're looking at what starts to happen as EVs and other kinds of vehicles come into play, and we won't have the same amount of gas tax, gas revenue. Happy to talk about 69 Express. That's our managed lane project in Johnson County. And HOME, which is the pilot program in conjunction with the Department of Ag, as we get broadband across the state, to take a look at how we can improve soil health, open up carbon markets, that sort of thing. And so now to come full circle, when I started this presentation by talking about transportation's about more than roads and bridges. And so you see MJ there, she's 5 now, and she's our local consult groupie. She started coming to local consult when she was 3 years old. Her grandma would bring her. And this is a quote that comes out of Southwest Kansas where it says, you know, people need more than just a paycheck. They're looking for education and recreation and sporting opportunities and shopping. And they want to do more than just survive. They want to thrive. They want to put down roots in Kansas. And transportation isn't the answer to all those things, but we're an enabler. We're a means to an end. And I very much appreciate everybody and your support as I think we really build out the system that we need in Kansas. So with that, I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Questions for the Secretary. Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Secretary Lorenz, for a great presentation as always. Can you tell me if the current programs that have been let, I know that when you let a project that the contractors often have inflation escalators in there for like oil products. I assume that there's something similar for aggregate, but I don't really know. And as part of those contracts, as we see this wage inflation coming across our country, do they have escalators in there for inflation due to salaries?
I should have Bert answer that specifically.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Francis, I'm Bert Morey. I'm the Deputy Secretary of State Transportation Engineer. We only have, I assume that they put some escalation in their bids, okay? There is one item that I know for sure that we up front will tell them that as the price of oil goes up or down, we will adjust throughout their contract, okay? But as far as other items, we don't do that.
Great, so we don't have to worry about contracts that have already been let other than the oil escalator, basically.
Exactly. Once we get a bid from them, that's solid throughout the length of the project other than the oil.
Thank you. And then, Madam Secretary, for the benefit of, there's some people from my community that are here, and am I correct that that core sample where the road looked beautiful on top and the core was bad was Highway 83 in Haskell County?
That's right.
And also, am I correct? I get asked about this a lot when we're in our community. It's the agency's decision at the time, rather than to make a 4-lane there or to build in place, was primarily because that subsection was so bad. They felt like for the ease of commerce and everything, it was easier to build a new road adjacent to it than it was to replace that base. Is that a Bert question too?
Yes, and that might predate us.
Or that was the way it was explained to me by Mr. Hall, but go ahead.
I can't answer that off the top
Okay.
of my head. I can find out.
And then the last, and I promise last question on my part, is the payment management system. Is that something that's already been in your budget, or is it something new this year? This is kind of me finding out what's coming down the pipe.
That's a great question. So we will be, it fits within our, but we're not asking for more. We do need to modernize our pavement management system. Yep. And it's not cheap, but it is super cheap compared to the investment we're going to make in preservation. So we are modernizing.
I would encourage you, from what I've heard from Chairman Waymaster, that maybe if we can get some numbers together, we make a push to use Spark or ARPA funds, they've got a section for government efficiency. I would think that software upgrade would fall in that.
sure.
If there's any way to
Sure.
get it in the budget process this year, it's got to be spent by 2025, is that correct?
Oh, okay, we can do that, because I think it's a laborious process. I believe our estimate is it will take us about 2 years to have the whole thing implemented, because we have to go out and pull the old data into the new system, you can imagine. Absolutely, because I think it's like $2 million.
Yeah, I mean, I'd
not
rather
cheap.
have a passing lane in Seward County than I would not use those Spark funds, you know.
It was-
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think you indicated that you were about 200 inspectors.
Short.
How do you manage?
Yep. So this is where we work with the private sector, and we will be looking to private sector inspectors to help us with that. So we hire, we have a contract with various consulting firms, and they provide inspectors for us. The trick is to make sure that we have enough KDOT qualified people to manage the consultant labor too. So if there's a dispute or question, it's so matter, regular course of business, we are confident our consultants can do a good job. But if there becomes a question of, do we need to reject this load or not, then that goes to a KDOT person, and we have to have enough folks in the field that can get to the job location site to decide what to do. No, we are, and we have modernized, and we went over this on Monday. We're doing things like, we actually advertise on Craigslist. We advertise, through social media. We are working with, this is not for the ETs, this is for snowplow drivers and CDL, certified the drivers, with Department of Corrections. So as inmates are getting ready to time out, re-enter the workforce, we're going to work with them. We had started down that path in 2019. We got disrupted because of COVID, but really bringing CDL classes into prisons so they can get certified before they even are released back to the general population. We're working with Topeka Rescue Mission too. Again, that's on the driver's side. On the ET side, the engineering techs and the inspectors, what we need there is we need a high school diploma with some math background. They need to have passed an algebra class and a geometry class so that when they look at a set of plans out in the field, they can say, is that being built or not? It is not an engineering degree. We'd like some more engineers too, but it's really that inspection side that we need to, that we're highly focused on.
Now, as far as if you're short of inspectors, you probably are short on just workers in general.
Oh,
I think it
yes.
came up about like snow removal and all of that. So if we get strong or bad weather, I should say, which we just, this weekend we did, and it continues, do you go to private sector for that as well?
That would be so, and we've sort of prioritized, that's the last thing I want to outsource. Because you need them for two reasons. One, they need to be available 24/7 when a storm comes. Also, the folks that we have plowing snow in the winter, they turn around in the summer and they mow and they patch potholes, so it's not like snow plowing is not their only job. When I talk about outsourcing, I talk about, or managing our work, the first thing is you can look to outsource some of your professional services, some of the inspections. Snowplow is the last thing I want to outsource. We need better tools. So this pavement management system is a good example. So we can outsource some work. We absolutely need better tools. The last thing, we can't outsource our fiduciary responsibility. We can't outsource policy and decision-making. So we're trying to, we talked about this at budget. Trash is a big problem in the Northeast, in Johnson and Wyandotte County. There's just trash everywhere. We don't have enough folks to both do the work of patching potholes and pick up trash. So we've outsourced picking up trash. But there's also quit throwing trash out your window. There's a two-prong approach here that we need to take. But we got to get our work done, and we have a worker shortage, and we don't pay people enough money. So we're trying to put all the levers together to keep things moving, because we also have good momentum. So it's, as we talked about on Monday, it's a complicated problem, and across America we don't have enough workers. So we are doing the best, and we say every winter, if we have a whole statewide storm, we're not going to get everything plowed at the same time. And, this year, we've been okay so far.
I think we'll knock with you. How about that?
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the great rundown. It was very thorough, and I love the slides, so I appreciate that we got those ahead of time. So I got a few questions, if you indulge me, Mr. Chair. The first one is, we heard about this a lot last year, too, about, as people transition to electric vehicles, the loss of gasoline revenue. And this may be an unfair question, but how much have you seen a drop already, and what percentage of the total revenues that you use for our infrastructure comes from the gas tax?
Great question. So we have not seen a drop in our revenues, with a big caveat. So we actually have seen a slight increase, and we anticipate for the next 5 years, less than 1% growth. What we don't know, though, because under the Biden administration, there's a lot of incentives to move to electric vehicles, so we don't know exactly what's going to happen. So haven't seen any loss yet. We know that about a third of our revenue comes from motor fuels tax. Now, you look forward, it's in the presentation for tomorrow. What is very concerning is not this year or next year, but it's, I think, in 2040, what we project, just with fairly conservative projections, is that we will not have as much gas tax either at the state or federal level. And so we then sort of necessarily say, oh, so it's going to be state sales tax. Well, that is not going to be sustainable. So I'm not worried today or tomorrow because it's not a light switch. But over time, which is why we're doing our road usage charge study, because we need to start thinking about it.
My next question was, I don't know how road construction industry is being affected, but as a small business owner, I'm getting crushed with the employment problem. We do not have enough people in the labor market to fill all the jobs that we've got. Have you seen over the last 2 years, with all this kind of employment craziness, a slowdown in people bidding for these projects, or the time it's taking to get the projects done?
Yes.
Because of labor force?
Yes.
Okay, well, that was a simple one. And then finally, I would be doing my constituents a disservice if I didn't ask. The last I heard on the Centennial Bridge is that it had been let for a request for proposal. Do you have any kind of update? Did that get let? Are we getting a bridge anytime soon?
So it has not been let to construction, I'm quite sure. But probably, have we looked for a consultant?
We have a consultant under contract.
Consultant under contract. But that's good news. That means the design is underway.
Okay, so any prognostication on when we're going to get a new bridge?
I am not going to prognosticate up here. We will have an announcement in the summer about what's going to construction.
Okay. I will be anxiously awaiting that announcement.
You know what? I love it because now that we do them on a regular basis, people look forward, which is also part of the thing. Instead of saying once every 10 years, it's helpful for people to be engaged because, well, I could go on and on. This year we heard about a couple of projects that we didn't know about 2 years ago. So it's really helpful to stay in touch with existing needs and to have the flexibility to get to new needs.
All right, thank you.
Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was slide 41. You got into the pavement preservation. It was just thin overlays, rehab, and reconstruction. And while my algebra is good, you got X and 2X and 3X, but what is the real cost differences between each of those categories? And I don't mean how much you're spending, but if one costs $100, the other next one 200, or what's?
Well, we have two choices here. Either I can tell you, we'll get you an answer, or we'll look to Bert to see if he's got a sense of that.
I would rather get you an answer.
You'd rather get you an answer.
Okay,
Okay.
that'd be fine.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then just prior to that was on 38, that was the challenge with the inflation and the prices. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I'm looking at, historically, it's 4.5%. Now it's running 19%. But as you get into big, long-term projects like the Ike project, I mean, are we preparing and possibly getting additional funding together to combat that? Or?
Because this is what we saw in one month, and we're talking about 12 months times 10 years, right? So we're watching it very closely. I'm not worried about a 10-year program yet, but we're watching it. We have additional federal dollars that I talked about. I don't want all the additional dollars going to inflation. I don't want all of our state dollars going to inflation, but we also need to catch up on some of that subsurface. So we're keeping a close eye on that. And we will start to run numbers about when we think we need to back off a little bit. We're also watching, the other thing that feeds into this is how many bids are we getting? So if we get to the point where we're getting 0 or 1 bids on a frequent basis, then we might slow our roll there too. So lots of levers to keep an eye on.
Further questions? Does anyone online have any questions? Madam Secretary, I've got a couple for you.
Okay.
Can you give us an idea of the total dollars that the infrastructure bill, or the federal bill, will bring into the state of Kansas?
For all of it or for just transportation?
Just for transportation.
Well, so that's I'll have to get that for you in that. What I would like to do is give you total amount and then break that out by what's new versus what is, like what's additional and what we had already expected, because we built Ike on the assumption that federal dollars would remain flat and that all extraordinary transfers would be shut off in '23. So those are the basics, which I suspect is part of your question, is are we up or down in the program? So I would like to do that accounting for you.
I would appreciate it very much. My next question, and I get this question quite frequently because people are saying, well, we want 4-lane. And we all want 4-lane, but we know it costs a lot of money to build and a lot of money to maintain. What's kind of a figure that it costs per mile to build 4-lane? Can you give me that, anything on that?
I think looking back, if you were just looking for a planning level, I think $11 million a mile is a good planning level value.
Is that like engineering right away? All that?
Yeah, the whole works.
The whole works, okay.
Yeah.
If there's already 2-lane there, and then you're going to add 2 lanes?
No, that's adding the 2 lanes.
That's just adding the 2 lanes. Okay,
$11 million a mile.
all right. So it's more expensive than I actually thought it was. So that's a reason.
High level.
Right, I understand that. And I think we've talked a number of times, I have with the secretary, about there's areas that are wanting the 4-lane, and I know that we can't make all of it 4-lane. And so we're going with some passing lanes. And that is really a great safety factor, in my opinion.
It is, and we're learning as we go. So I would say in Southwest Kansas, what we know through local consult and talking with folks. So wind blades are a big thing on our highways. Those are big. So when we are building passing lanes now, taking into account that wind blades are only going to get longer, we may need to make our passing lanes longer. That's one thing. We may also need more enforcement, because what you don't want are a bunch of wind blades in a convoy, so to speak, because then nobody can pass, and that frustration factor is part of the safety factor. So, nothing's as simple as just the concrete. It's always those pesky people using it that we have to take into account.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation once again. I was just thinking when we were talking about tolls and things like that, isn't there a section of the highway over there in southern Johnson County that they're putting a toll, or is that already completed?
No, we're not. So we have, we went through the process to see if it would make sense. So the new lane will be tolled. It took approval by Overland Park City Council, and then had to go to State Finance Council and to the KTA board. So all those approvals have been met. We are now going through our environmental process and looking at noise walls and all that sort of thing. Construction starts this year. And we're going to go with a design build and alternative delivery mechanism, so it'll go a lot faster. So you're doing the design and you're building, and it only lags. We don't do all the design and then do the building. And so it should be open, I think it's open to traffic in '25.
Okay. And how long of a stretch is that?
So it'll go from 155th Street to like, I think 103rd.
And
Couple of miles.
What would be the cost factor to go into that lane
So,
per vehicle?
oh, that is a great, I love that question because the answer is it depends on the time of day. So we're using very much a capitalistic approach. So as you're driving up, you'll see a sign and you're at like 160th and you know you're going to get off, let's say at 135th. And it may say, and it's 7:30 in the morning, and it may say 75 cents because a whole bunch of people are trying to get to work at the same time. In the afternoon, it may say 10 cents. So the cost, the minimum cost will cover the cost of tolling that lane. The maximum cost is based on how much traffic there is in all three lanes, the two free lanes and the priced lane. Because what we're doing is we're setting the price to keep the toll lane moving at roughly 55 miles an hour, almost open speed. So we want to not have everybody bungled up in the toll lane, but we want it to be low enough priced that people will use it so we get the other two lanes to move well too. Everybody gets an improved flow, but the people that choose to pay a little more, they get more at speed than the free lanes. Of course, nothing's really free, but the two free lanes. And you'll know when you get in, and you're guaranteed that price. The price may go up or down while you're in it, but you're going to pay the guaranteed price when you choose to get in that lane. It is being used all over the country, not new in the country, but new to us. And there's a traffic management center where the sensors in the road identify how much traffic there is in the three lanes, which then like goes into an algorithm that says how much we should be charging for the lane. And we vary that price depending on the amount of traffic to keep all the traffic moving. And we are obviously our partners KTA. So there's a K tag that's involved. So if you've got a K tag, you just get in, and it's charged to your account. If you don't have a K tag, that's okay because we've got license plate readers, which will then send you a bill. I am so excited for this approach. It doesn't work everywhere in the state. I'd be quick to say you have to have enough traffic to make it work. But what it does do is it allows Overland Park, because remember, everybody's got to pull a skin in the game. And so Overland Park had to come up with money for this additional lane. This allows them to generate their local match.
Thank you.
Oh, no, I could talk about this all day, so I'll stop there, but it is cool. And KTA has been a great partner.
Thank you.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And your question earlier prompted me to ask one more question. So it's $11 million to get 4-lane, which is quite the strain on the budget when we're looking at 40 or 50 miles of rural highway. What's the cost for a 2-mile passing lane, ballpark number? Again, I understand there's a lot of variables.
You've exceeded the limitations of my knowledge. I'm going to have to get back.
Okay, that'll be great. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Representative Weigel, if you've got one more, the Secretary will go on and on because, I mean, she really likes these hot lanes.
Or I'll just go on and on, so. Thank you.
Representative Minix.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, I apologize for my tardiness. I was at another event. And I missed the first part, so I'm going to have to catch up and do some homework. But I wanted.
We'll do a briefing. I'm happy. We got this is 101, but it's really more like 301. So, it's a master class in transportation.
This is like remedial for Transportation Committee. I wanted to thank you for your local consult process, and sounds like a new project that we can do in my area that would improve the safety in that area tremendously, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
They are great partners, good partners to work with.
If I remember correctly, that's Highway 83.
That's right. Yes, I saw Katie Eisenhower just this week.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, we appreciate very much your coming, and it was very productive and very informative, and we appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, all of you.
Committee, that takes care of everything today, but Vice Chair Del Perdang has some information he would like to discuss just a moment, so we'll turn the floor over to him.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate you letting me have the microphone for a little bit. Last year at this time, we ran a House bill through here. It was 2166. And some of you may or may not remember, but it had to do with distinctive license plates for military personnel, and it hit on all branches of the military. I'll read a section out of that real quick here, and then I wanted to just bring up what I'm hearing going on in just case you guys run into the same issue. But we put a new section 4 in with 2166, and it said on or after January 1st of 22, any owner or leasee of one or more passenger vehicles, and goes on, who is a resident of Kansas and who submits satisfactory proof to the Director of Vehicles in accordance with the rules that such person is currently serving in the United States Army or has separated from the U.S. Army and was honorably discharged upon compliance, basically can apply for this distinctive license plate. And everything was good on there. But I've had some constituents reach out that have not been able to get that license plate, who are currently members of the military. In my case, they're serving at McConnell Air Force Base. So I've engaged Chris here from the revisor's office, and what we found out is there was an exception created in 2014 specifically for these situations. It's KSA 8-1, 141, J as in Joseph. It provides that in addition to any residency requirements for all distinctive license plates, any person not a resident of Kansas serving as a member of the armed forces stationed in the state shall be eligible to apply for the distinctive license plate if the individual was a resident of the state, as if they were a resident of the state. Such person shall be eligible to renew the distinctive license plate registration as long as the person is still stationed in the state at the time the registration is renewed. So with that, I was able to get some of these. They took our information, went back down to the tag office, and it sounds like everything's going through. But I'm thinking if I'm running into it, chances are others are as well. So if anybody wants a copy of this information, you're more than welcome to it. So if there's any questions, I'd take them, but I appreciate the time.
Anybody have any questions? Chris, did you have a comment on it? Okay. Okay, anything else? Okay, committee, that does conclude our meeting today. Just know that we will be meeting next Tuesday and next Wednesday. Hopefully we can pick up some of those bills we missed out on working yesterday. So with that, we are adjourned.